Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today at the Combination Devices panel here at the Digital RESI March. We have four amazing panelists here today who would love to share with you their thoughts and perspectives in this space. This panel will be moderated by Rick Berenson from Mass Medical Angels. Before I let Rick take it away, I would just like to keep a note that to our audiences that you could use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen if you'd like to ask any questions. The panelists will try to address them during or at the end of the session. Okay, Rick, I'll let you take it away from here.
Joy, thank you so very much. It's a pleasure to be here with you. They really have assembled a terrific set of panelists, and I'm quite honored to be here among them. So my name is Rick Berenson. I am on the executive committee of Mass Medical Angels, but I'm also a serial life science entrepreneur. I have significant experience across a broad range of drugs, devices, healthcare IT, diagnostics, and also some experience in combination devices and some of the challenges that are faced there. So I'm delighted to be able to ask my panelists if they would please introduce themselves, give a little bit of background, their organization, a little bit about the funds that they're associated with, and some of their experience in combination devices. So Aid, since you're showing up first, why don't we start with you?
Sounds good. Thank you very much, Rick. So I'm Aude Sangha. I'm a partner at Alira Health and a partner for Alira Health Ventures. So Alira Health is a healthcare advisory firm. We provide services along medical devices, drugs, and digital health products life cycle, including regulatory, clinical, product development, but also strategy consulting, market access, and transaction advisory when it's time to divest or in-license to grow. My main focus is strategy consulting and transaction advisory at Alira Health. So I'm also a registered investment banker in the US. And as a partner for Alira Health Ventures, so Alira Health Ventures is a corporate fund of Alira Health. We invest in seed stages, mainly for medtech products. We happen to have a product which originally was a drug and will most probably be a device soon. So I'm sure we'll be able to talk about that soon. And I'm really happy to be here. I've been in the US for 5 years, but as you can hear, I'm French. So I know pretty well the European market too, since I started my career in Europe. So thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure. Omar?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Omar Khalil, partner with Sante Ventures. Sante is a firm that's been around for about 15 years now, currently investing out of a $250 million fund that we raised in 2018, Fund 3. And in Q2, we'll be closing Fund 4, which will be another $250 million in capital commitments. So Sante is a dedicated healthcare investor. We invest across the spectrum within healthcare, so biotech, which is my main area of focus, in addition to med tech, med device, as well as health tech. We are seed and Series A investors primarily, so we like getting in and being involved with companies from the earliest stages, work closely with the companies and the founders to form the companies if necessary, and work hand in hand in helping them establish the infrastructure and foundation. And we have a group. We provide what we have the portfolio services group that works closely with our portfolio companies to help them establish again the infrastructure needed as they get going. We are. Again, as I mentioned, we are early stage investors, and we look for those opportunities that have the potential to fundamentally impact and influence the care of patients within various disease categories, and that what we look for is that scientific or technical innovation that ultimately drives improved outcomes or reduced cost. And certainly in the context of the conversation that we're going to have here today, that may be by bringing together novel therapeutics with novel technology and engineering. My background, I'm a biomedical engineer by training. After engineering, went to McKinsey and Company, was with their healthcare practice for a number of years. Then joined Sante for the first time back with Fund 1 in 2007. Spent about 5 years with the firm, then left and joined Baxter Healthcare in a number of business development and operating roles. Subsequently went to a commercial stage biotech company called Kaleo, where I ran their allergy and immunology business, and then rejoined Sante last year to lead up our Boston presence. The firm itself is based in Austin with offices in Boston as well.
I'll jump in.
Thank you, Omar. Oliver.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Oliver Keown here, Director of Intuitive Ventures. My background, to start off, I trained originally as an MD in the UK, practiced in the NHS, trained in life sciences and medicine, moved into the world of surgical innovation myself, really across digital med devices out of Imperial College in London, before making the move into venture capital. I was most recently at GE Ventures, investing there across devices, digital and life science tools. I'd say my career has been defined at the intersection of these domains, which is why I'm passionate about this panel and what we're doing today at Intuitive. I joined Intuitive about a year and a half ago to lead the development of our new corporate venture fund. For those that don't know, Intuitive Surgical pioneered the field of surgical robotics and minimally invasive care. You may have heard of our Da Vinci robotic system. We have several platforms, including Ion and single port today, 8.5 million procedures, 67 countries, thousands of hospitals using the products. And I joined Intuitive, as I said, to set up a corporate venture arm. We launched in October last year, $100 million fund. We're a standalone, financial vehicle that's very focused on financial returns, and much like Omar and the team at Sante, investing in those independent, transformative opportunities that are really pushing the frontiers of better outcomes, better experience, more cost-effective care. We look at digital med devices, therapeutics, and increasingly at this convergence of devices and biotech, which I think is a really exciting field. And I think similar to Omar, for us, what gets us excited about making investments is when there is really innovative science and teams leading that science and addressing clinical needs that are big market opportunities and big patient burdens. And the practicality of how we invest, we write checks, kind of $500,000 up to $5 million, and focused early stage, I'd say series seed, series A, series B. So we like to support exciting teams early on that journey. We have in fact made an investment in this kind of broader space, which I can't share because it's in stealth at the moment, but certainly this is an area we're passionate about, and looking forward to the conversation today.
Great, thank you very much. So I thought I would start by just sharing a bit of a framework that the group actually put together after some discussions yesterday. Just to sort of lay out what the space is that we're talking about when we speak of combination devices. And so we came up with this 3x3 matrix that lays out across the top the applications, kind of the motivating driver for the device drug combination, and then regulatory categories down the side. So there are drugs that need a specific delivery modality and that therefore need to be essentially enhanced by a device in order to be effective. There are drugs that need to have a device in order to differentiate. These could be biosimilars or others that are trying to find a way to stand out from what would otherwise be an extremely competitive commodity type market. And then there are drugs that will have some benefit from connectivity. Often it's an adherence benefit. Sometimes it's a convenience benefit, which is not necessarily all that convincing from a market perspective. And then going down the regulatory dimension, you've got any of these combination devices are typically either device-led or drug-led. From a device-led perspective, you have things like drug-eluting stents. For drug-led, you've got drug delivery systems, and then true combination devices that really are not just a new device to deliver an existing drug, but a real combination from the get-go. So with that kind of background and framework, I'd like to ask the panel, and let's start with Olivier this time, and ask in each instance, or in some of these instances, what do you think is necessary for a company to be successful with the technology here? And can you identify examples of devices that have been successful?
Yeah, happy to weigh in. So I think ultimately it comes down to the value prop. I think in a value-based care world, and when we're focused on the quadruple aim of experience for patients and providers, for cost effectiveness and better outcomes, that needs to be the driving rationale. And that manifests, I think, in a lot of different combination products in different ways. But I think it's increasingly crucial that one can tie the value prop to a health economic benefit for the customers being served. I think, on the drug enhanced devices, you highlighted, drug coated stents. I think that the rationale for these types of the products, is it sustaining the release that's had some physiological impact of a drug that's known? Is it, delivering something locally, at the site of disease will inhibit what would otherwise be significant systemic toxicity? I think in some of the areas we're excited about and seeing kind of emergent venture opportunity in cell therapies, immunotherapies, that sustained local delivery is having a beneficial impact on the body's own response to treatment, maybe in the field of cancer or otherwise. And that's actually unlocking potentially, it's early in some of the science cases, better outcomes, right? Better survival and the endpoints that matter. I think gliadel is an interesting example where that's been a combination of a wafer biomaterial type technology and a chemotherapy agent for brain cancer, for glioma, which has shown that kind of sustained local delivery can have an impact. So I think there's a lot of opportunity across this matrix, but I would bring it back always to that quadruple aim and having a very clear articulation of the value.
Great. Omar, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I completely agree with Oliver there. I mean, I think at the end of the day, as I mentioned at the outset, it really comes down to, what is the enhanced therapeutic effect that's going to result by combining the drug and the technology and the device. I've mentioned and Rick highlighted all, we see a lot of business plans where, there's an approach using technology to improve the convenience of administration. And while certainly there's an argument to be had for importance of adherence, medication adherence, unless that is validated and demonstrated in terms of the outcome benefit there, that the technology truly does lend to adherence, it really falls into the category of convenience and ease of use, which, to Oliver's point, you really need to be able to it's going to have a hard time generating enthusiasm from the various stakeholders in the health system, with where all you're adding is additional cost and technology. So you really need to think through, what's the reimbursement look like for for these technologies, because again, if the technology truly does enable or address some form of fundamental challenge with the efficacy of a therapeutic or of a therapy, that has real potential in gaining adoption and having an impact on patient outcomes. But there's a fine line there that we see a lot of companies struggle with, which is just trying to set, focusing in on that convenience factor versus really identifying the that improvement in outcomes.
Sure. So, I mean, I cannot agree more with Oliver and Omar. So I know very well the drug delivery system space and can give you some more flavor, but, I would just only highlight what has been said. I think that the only thing I can add is that from a startup standpoint or early stage company, which is looking for funds, remember what Omar and Oliver just said, and propose actually be sure that when you develop a device, you do not develop the device or the drug combination device alone, and already anticipate from the beginning what is the ecosystem you are targeting, who are you serving. Generally, you are serving the patient. You may be also serving the HCP and the other stakeholders. So from the beginning, anticipate what would be the ecosystem and what will be your monetization strategy for a device. In the drug delivery system space, typically, if you're adding, I would say, fancy features or connectivity or anything which is more on the enhanced experience of the patient, this device will be more expensive. So you need to understand who will pay for that, and particularly in the US and in Europe, the regulatory, but mainly the reimbursement landscape will be highly different. In the US, patient will be willing to pay for convenience. In Europe, that might not be the case. In the US, you can find some the payers might be actually able to pay for convenience. In Europe, this will actually never be the case. So the patient will have to, obviously, the direct patient strategy has to be envisioned from the beginning. So really think from the beginning about what is the device is bringing to the market, and how am I able to demonstrate that there is value for the one paying the device, either the patients or the payers.
Great. Well, thank you. So Ehud, let me go back to you and ask what kind of trends you're seeing in the market for people, the types of combination devices that are likely to be successful. How has that changed over the past, say, 5 years?
Sorry, were you gonna?
Good.
Go ahead. Go ahead. I wasn't sure who was going.
No, I can start and give you an example. I think that for instance, just to take again the drug delivery system space, there've been a tremendous in the past, not 5 years, but it's been about 5-10 years. We've been talking about the care moving to alternative sites, so outside of acute and to home care. We've been talking about that for a while. I think that the COVID crisis just accelerated this trend, and we all realize that, the industry, either the pharma or the medtech side, is really to provide some solution for this to happen. So what we've been seeing are really, a huge acceleration into the development of devices which will help home care administration. Example, some companies are like Roche, for instance, has been working on developing a sub-Q Herceptin. So, currently the patient has to go in acute care, it's IV, it takes hours. So now they are developing a formulation actually to be able to administer the drug at home, and that would be supported obviously by an auto-injector or a specific device. So this is both to address the home care shift, but also, if you think about it, to address the life cycle management from the product perspective, right? These products are going to go off patent. Developing a device is actually a good way to add more IP and to sustain the sales of the revenues around the product.
Omar, I know you had something to add.
No, not necessarily voluntarily. No, I was just making sure I was. I hadn't missed it originally. No, well, so just building on what Toad said. Yeah, I think certainly we're seeing the trends around connectivity and increased connectivity. Again, the mindset needs to be, how does this connectivity improve care, right? Data for data's sake, certainly is good from a research standpoint, but when it comes to selling the story to the payers and really, actually, I would say, even in the U.S., I think the reimbursement landscape has a high bar for paying for any sort of convenience and without demonstrating the impact on health outcomes. So you see that, we are seeing that more with, certain trends in, inhalers for, COPD and asthma, et cetera, some other, chronic medications where you need to make sure that adherence is met. So you're seeing that those trends from a connectivity standpoint. And then, I think to, something Oliver mentioned earlier, not to steal his thunder, but where you are really seeing the technology, address some of the challenges that the therapeutics have as a singular agent, right? Where the toxicity is too great, or perhaps the PK profile is not, what's needed to demonstrate efficacy and have sustained efficacy. Combining that with technology to whether it's polymer-based combination products that enable a better release profile, or various other local or targeted implantables. Those types of technologies do present some exciting opportunities in the future.
So what about devices that not only can modulate the delivery rate, but also can sense the results of that delivery, have some kind of sensors that are relevant to whatever the outcomes are? Is that a value added that's different from simply convenience?
For sure. I think, that's the holy grail, right? The closing the loop of the therapeutic cycle and being able to, automate. I think insulin pumps, and the advances in that space is like a, prime example of, closing the loop on the therapeutic impact. I think the regulatory space and kind of the automation of these and the software advances and how AI gets incorporated is a new trend, right? And how kind of willing we are to allow the technology to make the decision to, before we're incumbent on the patient. So I think that's a natural extension of sensor innovation and tying that to, physiological, biomarkers that can be measured, maybe in situ, that demonstrates the efficacy of these treatments. I think that will be an exciting kind of future space, not just in metabolic, in cancers and other things, right, where we can maybe sense early signal around, cancer recurrence or other things. And I maybe add, just to the previous set of questions, in terms of trends, I think we're going to see this blurring of device and treatment, right, over time. And, with some of the innovation you're seeing in ablative technology, so energy being delivered maybe to target a cancer or tumor, paired with the delivery of a drug, and the science showing that sometimes, that agitation of the cellular structure through energy can actually increase uptake of the drug. Both are effectively therapies, but you've got that device drug combo. I think that's going to be a kind of increasingly interesting field. You're going to see tissue engineering advances where you have kind of physiological structural components that provide both a mechanical kind of treatments, but also therapeutic opportunity as scaffolds for cells and other areas. So there's just a lot of innovation that's going to be happening in this space. So I think it's pretty fertile ground, and exciting to see that, the device world getting closer and closer to the physiology and impacting disease at more of a granular level.
I think that the whole ability to take intelligence and add it to drug delivery opens up a lot of opportunity, but there are a lot of challenges as well that combination devices will face in the future, and face in particular today. And I thought maybe we should talk a bit about those and some strategies for dealing with them. And why don't we start out with reimbursement? So what is the reimbursement world like now for combination devices, and what do you have to show if you're going to be economically successful? Who'd like to start?
I'll take a crack, and I'm sure my co-panelists have a lot of thoughts on this as well. I know we talked about it much yesterday, but yeah, I think first of all you've got to understand what pathway is the product going to be reimbursed under. I mean, I think one of the I think that's the first step, is making sure you truly understand what pathway reimbursement this technology falls under. I mean, a lot of times, for the drug delivery systems, right, those are falling under the drug benefit, and whether it's Part B, Part D, what have you, from a Medicare standpoint. A lot of in other cases, it's going to fall under the DRG within the health system. So you've got to understand, again, the reimbursement path for the specific product first of all. But then it comes back to it comes back to demonstrating that health economic outcomes benefit, right? You've got to be able to just like with any other novel technology, whether it's a standalone, drug or a standalone device. You've got to be able to demonstrate why the combination is going to drive, superior outcomes, either in cost or in quality. And so, having that strategy up front, understanding what the evidence generation strategy needs to look like from the early days of product development is essential to being able to gain the type of reimbursement that'll really enable broad adoption.
Terrific.
I'd add, as an investor that's somewhat focused on those types of combination therapies that might touch on an episode of care, that point around the DRG and the envelope of payment being a real barrier. There are very real opportunities to bypass some of those limitations through NTAP as a kind of novel payment mechanism. Breakthrough devices offering opportunities with CMS to reimbursement. But as an investor, I really want to see, I get excited when I hear a very early stage, seed stage startup talking about reimbursement strategy early, because it really, putting in place an evidence strategy and, what their publications will look like, knowing that publications will tie to their maybe 5-7 year out reimbursement strategy, kind of getting on that early and, knowing how to navigate some of these kind of opportunistic payments kind of mechanisms that are out there, NTAP being one. But ultimately, my take on this, simplistic as it may be, is that you're going to get reimbursement through some of these mechanisms, but the clinical efficacy has to be there, right? And it has to be an improvement, it has to be value, it has to be cost effectiveness. And so, again, that's why I go back to the science and the value prop, that has to be there. It has to be evidence kind of able, and then the opportunity should exist to find reimbursement.
Dude?
Maybe one thing I can add, just to give a few examples, because Oliver and Omar already talked about the regulatory pathway and reimbursement. Reimbursement is key, of course. What I've seen in a couple of examples, actually, that some companies were totally certain that their regulatory pathway was drug or device, and they didn't honestly do the right resources or engage the right resources at early stages, and then discovered a few months or a few years later, actually, that the assumption for regulatory pathway were totally wrong. So it's very important. I mean, to think about reimbursement, you need to understand the status of the product, and to understand the status of the product, it does require, for a lot of combination devices, the novel ones particularly, some interactions with the FDA. So you do want to have these pre-IND meetings to meet with the FDA to be sure about your regulatory pathway. Why? Because obviously, if you're a drug or if you're a device, your reimbursement landscape is going to be totally different. Same product. If you think about a wound debridement product, for instance, if it's a drug, then obviously we are talking about several hundreds of dollars for a product. If it's a device and that doesn't have any, chemical action, but just mechanical action, if it's recognized as a device, then we are talking about much lower buckets of reimbursements. So this seems to be obvious, but I've seen several times some companies not understanding well their regulatory pathways, planning on business plan with a certain price, and ended up having to totally review this. One of the things is that obviously if it's a drug driven opportunity, you might reach a higher reimbursement, but obviously you need to understand what is your competitive landscape, because if you are a drug into a device landscape, not only you're going to have to to do some clinical trials, so much higher expenses and needs for RESI, but also you might not be competitive in terms of price, because your added value is not high enough to sustain the price of clinical trials and the price that you would have to put after the product. So really look at the regulatory pathway, have early interaction with the FDA before you convince yourself that your product will be regulated as a drug or a device. That's
maybe we could put a little bit more structure around what the regulatory pathway looks like for a combination device. So as I understand it, if it's drug-led, that is, if the primary mode of action is going to be chemical, as you describe it, then depending upon whether it's a biologic or a small molecule, you could have a BLA or an NDA as your endpoint, with a consult from the devices group. Whereas if it's primarily mechanical, then it would work the other way around. The primary pathway would be a devices pathway, probably heading towards a PMA, but with a consult from the drug group. And that, as you say, having the sub-Qs, the pre-IND interactions early, very important in establishing that. What advice would you have for early companies that are trying to figure out how to navigate that process?
I can go. I mean, I'm gonna, at Alira we do regulatory, so I can only advise you to reach out to a good regulatory consultant. I think that this is that hopefully will be Alira, but doesn't have to be. But just think about hiring a good regulatory consultant that have experience in your specific fields, and will really get the right questions to the FDA during your pre-IND or early stage meetings with the FDA. That's
great. Omar, Oliver,
no,
do you have specific experiences that would be helpful here?
I think getting access to the right expertise is the most critical thing. I mean, I don't know if there's necessarily anything that I can extrapolate from my previous experiences, given how unique each drug device combination truly is. But I think exactly as Ud mentioned, the need for, the best thing any company can do is, get access to the right expertise who has, who understands the relevant divisions within the FDA and help, advise you appropriately and also engage the FDA, as early as it makes sense.
Yeah, I'd emphasize that, as an investor, I have, held off on, diving deeper on companies until they've, achieved that type of feedback and that type of clarity, because there's so many cascading assumptions on the operating model, on the development path, on the expenses, as Ud mentioned there, dependent on it. And I think the proxy for less information is the quality of the regulatory advisors that the company has, or maybe there are mechanisms to formally request kind of adjudication early, on what direction they should take. So that's not a small burden, but if there's a lack of clarity there, it can be a means of really de-risking as a team and the approach forward. So yeah, my advice would be phone Ud and Alira Health and other quality regulatory consultants early.
Actually, maybe one thing I can add about that is that we at Alira, we're going to be publishing a report on drug delivery systems soon. So you have a few slides actually explaining what is the general regulatory landscape. So that's going to be, if you follow me on LinkedIn and Alira Health on LinkedIn, you will see that. And we will also, maybe host a webinar only on this. So if the regulatory topic is important for you, you can find resources on the Alira Health, social media and everything that we have. So happy to help on that.
So these combination devices often will fit into a rather complex ecosystem of stakeholders. You've got patients who are going to have to use them and for whom the carrot is that it's more convenient. You've got providers who may believe this is going to be a more effective way of getting the right PK profile or whatever other qualities you're trying to get from the drug. You've got payers who are looking at the economics. And sometimes this can enable new ways of looking at the payer economics, such as if you're able to measure the outcomes from the therapy, get more towards a value-based kind of a clinical outcomes-based reimbursement scheme. So how do you think about these types of issues and how they should fit into the strategy of the early stage company?
Not to hammer the same point back, but I think you outlined it there really well, Rick. It's about aligning the incentives across the ecosystem and the stakeholders. It's having a value proposition for each of the kind of decision makers in the tree that are influential on a given combination therapy success. So I think I think it has to be, it has to kind of tick all the boxes, right, to be, really a really successful opportunity, or at least so successful in certain dynamics that it can kind of outweigh in others. But I think again, a startup that can, as an investor, seeing a startup that can articulate that value proposition, can articulate the complexity of the ecosystem they're playing in, those different dynamics, and why there will be a pull from patients because of the convenience factor, or their experience for payers because this is either cost effective in the short term because of pricing, versus competitors, or this is, transforming an outcome that has an impact on readmissions, or, recurrence of disease, or whatever, right? These are the things that needs to be built into that thesis. And if it's super early, it can be a thesis, but it should be backed up. If it's later stage, we want to see evidence for these things.
So I'd like to, Omar, before you, and I want to come to you, Omar, in just a second, but I just wanted to remind everybody in the audience that if you've got questions or things you'd like us to talk about in particular, you can use the chat or you can use the Q&A feature. And we're monitoring them, and we are happy to be responsive to your particular concerns, but I'm also very interested in knowing what Omar was about to say.
Thank you, Rick. Now you've set the expectations high. Now I've got to deliver. No, actually, all I was going to say was, I think just given the complexity of, this space and the fact that you do have so many different stakeholders, not to, go back to marketing 101, but I think really, mapping out doing the stakeholder mapping and understanding who your decision makers are and what the patient journey looks like, even at an early stage, can be incredibly valuable. I'll give you one example. Again, because you have multiple different stakeholders and different companies, right? If you're a drug company, or if you're selling to a drug company, hey, big pharma, big biotech, but it's a device-based application that requires surgeon training, as an example. That is not a, surgeon training, doing in-services, that is not something a lot of drug companies are used to doing, right? So understanding, elements that are going to influence the decision-making process, how these products get used in the clinical setting, and then ultimately who's making the purchasing decisions and the reimbursement decisions, mapping that out for your respective products, I think is incredibly valuable, even at an early stage.
So I'd like to turn us to a question that I'm sure is on everybody's mind here at RESI, which is, what's it like to try and fund one of these combination device companies? What are some of the unique challenges that that they face, and how do you overcome them? Who'd like to start?
Well, I'll just throw one thing out there. I mean, I know, I think Oliver and I both represent, firm, kind of funds that are willing to invest, kind of across therapeutics and technology, and so, we can gain, I think our firms, have, relative comfort around that, but a lot of our peers, in the industry may have, more siloed approaches in terms of, just therapeutics or just devices, and something that fits halfway in both buckets may not be as easily, you can really understand it as, get your arms around it, put together an investment thesis, and get conviction around it within the firm. So, I think certainly the fact that it's not easily categorized can be a challenge. And, it really comes down to making sure certainly finding the right investor that can understand the value proposition is certainly key.
I'd add just that I totally agree. There's kind of traditional silos that not all firms are willing to cross, even firms that might have really well established, med device and biotech, sitting in the same shop. I do think, and my impression even over the last 2 years, that there's increasingly a cohort of both kind of East Coast traditional biotech investors and West Coast, maybe more traditional health tech and tech investors that are kind of moving into the biotech space, that are looking at these convergences. They see the science, and things like Y Combinator and just the pull and energy around early stage companies that have been kind of seeded in some of these spaces, I think is creating a bit of that momentum. So I think there is increasing appetite for investors that'll look more broadly at kind of new patterns that haven't necessarily been kind of tested. So I think there's capital out there, but again, it comes back to venture kind of 101. It needs to be, to get the venture capital, this needs to be venture backable problem with a venture backable solution that's, could be scaled to be, a big impact, both clinically and, financially for the investors. And so if it ticks those boxes, I think there's opportunity out there. I think both Intuitive and Sante and the Alira Health Venture Fund that Wood manages are potential players in that.
Yeah. This is, I think, a real challenge, is being able to separate the wheat from the chaff from a fundraiser's perspective. An early stage company's got to find the right investors to be able to talk to, who will even listen to a combination device story, because, as you point out, the siloing challenge. If the people who've come to this panel are lucky enough to have at least heard from several folks who do, but how would they go about finding other folks who might find their stories to resonate? That's not an easy question.
Well, I think that, I think that just to add on what Oliver and Omar just said on your last question, I think that it's key for the entrepreneur to know what is driving the value of let's talk about a technology rather than a drug or a device or a digital health solution. So based on what will be driving the value of the technology, then you can target much more of a fund that has biotech knowledge or a medtech knowledge. If the value of the device is really into the device, a VC having experience in developing devices, in the regulatory landscape of devices, will certainly be a better investor than a VC with just the biotech landscape. If you are pushing a drug which is currently not approved, then obviously a VC with much more of a biotech background and biotech approach to development and will be much better for the product. And then same on digital health. The only thing on digital health, as you mentioned, Oliver, I think that obviously since we are in a regulated industry, it will still be important to have a fund that understand about the healthcare, understand about the reimbursement landscape in healthcare. So really understand first what is driving the value of the product, and in driving the value, and I think Oliver and Omar mentioned it several times, really what is the value. I think this is the first thing that you have to show to investor, how it is disruptive, how it's changing patient outcome, or the system outcome. And yeah, I think that's how you can guide maybe your search for investors. I mean, that's my opinion. It was a difficult question though, but I don't know what Omar and Oliver think about this one.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's spot on. And when it comes to fundraising, I mean, I don't know if there's anything necessarily different about this category that I would recommend for anybody pursuing fundraising, which is do your homework on the investors, leverage your network, really make get the best entree into the venture firms that you can, get a good introduction from a mutually reputable source. I mean, all of those things are ultimately what make it successful. And then hating what Oud mentioned in terms of finding doing your homework to find the right fit with the venture firm is key.
Yeah, maybe looking at your comps as well, right? Who are the other players that have treaded a similar path to you, or you see as your competitors? And look at the investors that have backed those companies, and use that as part of your lens to find opportunities, and then look at similarly profiled investors and the like. And usually, investors are very collaborative, right? I think starting to have the conversation with certain investors, they will be well positioned to advise kind of who knows what, who has a particular personal interest in this. And so, ask the investors that you're pitching to kind of who might be interested in this type of opportunity, because I think they can be a fantastic channel into appropriate funds that might be better served to support a given company.
So the question of comparables actually leads us to one other issue, which is for any investor, the exit path is going to be critical. And so any early stage company needs to be thinking about who potential acquirers are. where this technology would go after it's been successful. What are the challenges for combination devices in finding the right potential exit partners?
Well, similarly to the investor discussion, I mean, the fact is there aren't the exit universe of at least if we look at M&A, right? The strategic universe is also largely siloed in biotech, pharma, device, right? And so finding the right strategic partner who's going to be excited about an acquisition of the company or the technology in the future, it may limit, you have a smaller universe of potential buyers, which, can result in, some additional challenges when you get to, thinking through the exit strategy. And then, in addition, one other dynamic that, I think many companies have in this space is, figuring out, are you valued as a pharma company, or are you valued as a device company? And, there are, certainly I think given the current market environment, there's a lot of interest in trying to be valued as a pharma company, or a biotech company, I should say. But at the same time, that may not necessarily be the right answer I mean, if the technology is fundamentally a device technology leveraging an established API or therapy that's already been available, it may be a device valuation is more appropriate. So I think as you think about the public markets, really understanding how you position the company with respect to the public investors becomes a challenging story to articulate as well.
Yeah, I would argue that the bucketization into are you a device or a biotech from a valuation perspective really comes down to margins, right? Margins on biotechs tend to be really high, and margins on devices tend to be not so high. So when you think about how you want to get bucketized, I think you've got to make your case around what the economics is for your ultimate product. Will you be able to sustain pharma-like margins at the 90 to 95% rate? Or will you be more like a device, which could be as low as 60%?
I think that's fair, Rick. But I think from the perspective of a potential acquirer, there's obviously margin, and you'll have to make the economics based on the valuation, et cetera, and you'll come up with a perspective on that to justify the economics. But there's certain elements of the fundamental business model, the regulatory environment, the reimbursement environment that will match the DNA of one or the other much more appropriately, right? So if you're maybe delivering something in the episode of care and you're constrained by DRG and the reimbursement and regulatory frameworks of maybe a 510K or a PMA, that's going to fit the even if it's a super high margin product, it's going to fit the DNA of a more of a manufacturer med device traditional player than maybe a pharma company. I think that your DNA, your structure is going to be important. I think ways you can kind of test that and de-risk it is exploring kind of BD type engagements early in your development to test those strategic signals and kind of build relationships and partnerships. Also, again, from a venture perspective, and we want it all, right, when we're looking at these opportunities, but is there a platform potential for this company? There's probably a primary device, drug combo. Can the device be leveraged for additional APIs or products? Can the drug be delivered in novel ways elsewhere? Both that kind of seeds the way to kind of like an independent business unit type acquisition, but also makes it more like a kind of independent IPO type potential outcome. So I think just thinking through those elements early and how you position yourself so that you're setting yourself up for as much optionality and as much value when it comes to exit.
Terrific. Did you want to add something to this, or shall I ask my last question? And I'd also invite the audience, if they have any questions, to please chime in through the questions or chat. And the last is just to ask whether you have any examples of combination device deals that you found attractive or ones that you have found unfundable. And feel free to disguise the description a little bit, but the kind of fundamental characteristics that have made things very compelling or clear walkaways.
Can talk about one is, it goes back to the regulatory landscape. So, if your product is playing into a device market where, the switch will be difficult to do because of cost, for instance, which, we don't all want to be in, but that's sometimes the case. If your product happens to be regulated as a drug and requires some clinical trial, so the molecule itself is not already approved, then this may be a barrier to for adoption and for funding. That's one I can think of, and it's really about the regulatory. I mean, all the barriers I've seen are really about the regulatory status and the fact that some business plans were not solid enough, only based on the the uncertainty around the regulatory status.
I'd say one element that I've seen trip up potential opportunities. I'll give you the broad example, kind of local chemotherapy delivery and innovations around biomaterials and other things to deliver that. And intellectual property and defensibility of some of these just becomes a challenge, right? There's a lot of prior art, there's broad exposure. I think sometimes companies don't have a strong view on kind of where they sit, what's defensible. That can sometimes be a challenge. And then lack of evidence, right? They could be at a later stage and maybe they haven't done the safety, they haven't shown the efficacy in appropriate animal models. These types of kind of more basic, like getting the evidence and the appropriate story together to justify the value inflection milestone that they're fundraising against. That's often a challenge. But I'd say they're two common pitfalls I see. The second is definitely more correctable. With work and effort.
I think the other one, pitfall that I'd add that we often see is the team dynamics or the team composition as well. I mean, making sure you've got the right expertise, right, regardless of which side you come from. I mean, in many cases, we see these teams coming from the drug side that are developing this drug device combination, or vice versa, and we see gaps in the team, right? If it's a drug, you've got saw one recently where it was a drug device combination, very strong team from a drug development standpoint, but didn't have the right engineering capabilities and experience on the team, right? And that's want to make sure, especially, I mean, certainly if it's earlier stage, we have time to influence that. But as you get later stage and continue in development, you want to see a team that's that is going to really address all of the different dynamics that these complex therapies are gonna have to face.
Great point.
Terrific. Well, thank you all. Any last word? Any last bit of wisdom you'd like to share? I'd like to note that we haven't had any questions come in, which is a testament to the thoroughness of your answers. Nobody could think of anything that you haven't already covered. So, but any last bits of wisdom to share? Okay. Yeah, no, please go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, I hope we haven't given the impression that this is all tough and that there's too much cynicism. There's huge opportunity here, and I think it's an incredibly exciting space. And so, looking forward to seeing more and more innovation and really the development of expertise at the intersection, right? And the new category, that's not just medtech and biotech. It's this combination space. So looking forward to that.
This is an area of enormous potential innovation. It is a true new frontier. And it's going to require not only visionaries on the entrepreneur side and the science side, but also among investors. We've been very lucky to have a panel of people who have that right kind of vision. And I hope that you in the audience have a similarly ambitious vision and are able to pursue it successfully. I hope that you enjoy the rest of the RESI conference, and we look forward to interacting with you as you proceed along your journey. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you all for the opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you all so much.